1980s was the decade that WWE became a truly global phenomenon. It was the decade of an aggressive national expansion spearheaded by Vince McMahon Jr., the decade of rock and wrestling crossover, and the decade that birthed Hulkamania. A golden era, but the 80s were also a decade where character was truly king and work rate was sorely lacking much of the time. That may have given fans some larger-than-life personalities to cheer or boo, but it also gave them some piss-poor matches too. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 worst WWE matches of the 1980s. Join us! Number 10, Rick Rude vs Jake Roberts at WrestleMania 4. When you spot the names of these two Hall of Famers next to each other on the bill, you expect it to be nothing less than very good. And at WrestleMania, well, Jake Roberts and Rick Rude had the capacity to steal the damn show together. Not at WrestleMania 4 though. Oh no, rather than steal the show, they almost stopped the show by putting everybody to sleep. To be fair to the match, it's not that it's actively terrible or that they're botching spots left, right and centre, it's more that it's just so interminably dull. Ravishing Rick and the Snake always had the capacity to change the pace of their matches and bring the crowd on the proverbial emotional rollercoaster ride with them. But they didn't do that here, failing to get out of second gear and returning to the dreaded chinlock time and time again. Not only did this test the viewer's patience, but it also completely telegraphed the end result of this WWE title tournament match. After 15 uneventful minutes, the match was rendered a draw and nobody advanced to the quarterfinals. Serves the boring bastards right. Number 9, Bad News Brown vs Kemper Tera at SummerSlam 1988. Another of WWE's original Big Four pay-per-views, SummerSlam has also not been immune to hosting the occasional stinker. In fact, quite a few took place on the very first one. A red-hot, sold-out Madison Square Garden was treated to such barn burners as Dino Bravo vs Don Morocco, Junkyard Dog taking on Rick Rude, and a tag team showdown between the Bolsheviks and the Powers of Pain. Worst of all, however, was Bad News Brown's clangor with Kemper Tera. Both men were legit badasses and could certainly put on a good match on their day, but SummerSlam 1988 was decidedly not their day. It feels like a random thrown-together affair and it quickly goes downhill. Patera, in particular, badly mucks up some stuff while moving at a glacial pace. Hindering things further, the MSG faithful didn't buy into the Olympic strongman at all, and it didn't take long for the boring chance to start up. Thankfully, it's all wrapped up in under 7 minutes, with Brown picking up the win with the Ghetto Blaster. Based on his performance here, it's no shock that Patera was gone just a few months later. Number 8, the Islanders vs the Young Stallions at Royal Rumble 1988. Along with the first SummerSlam, 1988 was also the year of the first televised Royal Rumble, that year's version airing as a TV special before it became one of WWE's most anticipated pay-per-view events. Considering the event was named after the experimental Battle Royal, you might expect it to headline, no? Well, no. The Royal Rumble was actually the semi-main event, with a 2-hour 3 falls tag team match between the Islanders and the Young Stallions going on last. With all due respect to Haku, Tama, Paul Roma and Jim Powers, and especially Haku because I fear he would turn my bones into dust by simply looking menacingly in my direction, their 15-minute effort was a massive come-down after, the first ever televised Royal Rumble. The action was just about acceptable, granted, but the production was all over the place and WWE made the strange decision to have an Andre the Giant promo take place in the middle of it. That decision ended up robbing the match of what little heat it had, and the building couldn't clear out quick enough when the Islanders made it 2 falls to 0. Number 7, the Bushwhackers vs the Fabulous Rougeau Brothers at WrestleMania 5. The Bushwhackers, like being punched repeatedly in the crotch, are an acquired taste. Hey look, seriously, there are guys out there who actually like having that done to them. No judgment here, but it's not for me. I will, however, judge anyone who professes to get sincere pleasure from the wacky antics of Butch and Luke. The goofy tag team was strictly lower card material and were usually palatable as long as they got out of the way early. At WrestleMania 5, the Bushwhackers went on 4th and were given almost 10 minutes to play with. I say play with, but really the only thing they played with was Jay's tallywhacker when Luke was hoisted up for a slam. I would call that the one lone highlight of this turgid mess, which was slow, unfunny, needlessly long, and very one-sided. And after getting their asses kicked for much of the duration of the contest, the Bushwhackers managed to sneak a win thanks to their eye-rolling battering ram. The match was a total crowd killer, and only isn't lower because at the very least it gave me the chance to listen to the Rougeau's fabulous theme music. Number 6, the Wild Samoans and Samu versus Rocky Johnson, SD Jones and Bobo Brazil in MSG. This six-man from Madison Square Garden was all about the return of the legendary Bobo Brazil. Reportedly one of Vince McMahon's favourite ever wrestlers, Bobo was put over big as the most important African-American wrestler in history as he made his introduction. Regrettably, the then 59-year-old was unable to convince anyone who might not have seen him in his prime just why he was such a big deal. Brazil looked to be in tremendous physical shape for his age, but immediately mistimed his spots during the opening exchanges and fell over at multiple points. Bobo and the match never recovered, and it all felt like it was being wrestled in slow motion at times. The Samoan trio are willing to sell and be thrown about a bit, but it's simply not enough to salvage things. After Bobo does his patented headbutts, which really shouldn't work on Samoans, but let's not question the science behind it right now, Jones gets double-teamed behind the ref's back, providing a flat ending to a borderline embarrassing match. Number 5, Greg Valentine versus the Junkyard Dog at the first WrestleMania. Quickly back to the long-suffering MSG crowd now. Alright, so they were witness to some of the most iconic moments and best matches in the history of the business, but still they had to endure a lot of absolute crap too. The New York Massive were especially expectant for this new extravaganza dubbed WrestleMania, with its tagline of the greatest wrestling event of all time. Great wrestling was not the flavour of the evening, as sports entertainment theatrics were relied upon to make up for a lack of thrilling in-ring action. The Intercontinental Championship match between Greg Valentine and Junkyard Dog certainly didn't provide any thrills. Junkyard Dog's weak headbutts were hardly convincing, and the Hammer noticeably had to lower his level in order to get something barely watchable out of the Dog. It was actually Valentine's manager, Jimmy Hart, who provided the most excitement here by taking a scary spill onto the concrete floor shortly before the weak count-out ending. This came right after a match that ended in a double disqualification, no less. An early low point for the prestigious IC title on the grandest stage. Number 4, Randy Savage versus George Steele on Saturday night's main event. Speaking of Intercontinental Champions, how about that Randy Savage, eh? The Macho Man was on fire in the mid to late 80s, but his golden touch did not extend to his series of matches with George the Animal Steele. The worst of the bunch was this outing from the 9th edition of Saturday night's main event. To start, I should probably mention that this was very much a storyline-driven endeavour, as the simple Steele was besotted with the innocent Miss Elizabeth, sending the famously reasonable Randy positively crackers. Savage had further cause to be upset when his rival Ricky Steamboat came out to stare him down and allow the green-tongued oaf to kidnap his wife and take her backstage. After that early bit of excitement, the bout really begins to lag. Steele is out of shape and can hardly move, relying on simple slams and biting both the turnbuckles and his opponent's head. Randy tries to move around enough for two people, bless him, but it is a fruitless task, and the match comes to a welcome end when he bonks his hairy foe with the ring bell. Number 3, The Ultimate Warrior versus Andre the Giant on Saturday night's main event. The Ultimate Warrior versus Andre the Giant is a match that you would politely call an attraction. That's code for we know this is going to be rubbish, but at least it has a spectacle factor about it, if nothing else. Vince McMahon boldly proclaimed that this was one of the greatest championship matches ever on Saturday night's main event as the 8th wonder of the world made his entrance. Vince, mate, I know you're the promoter and everything, but maybe you should wait, 30 or so seconds before making that kind of bold statement. Andre was so beyond broken down at this point and relied almost exclusively on trying to choke the muscle-bound, neon-soaked Intercontinental champ. His face a constant grimace of pain, the Giant attempts to lead the match as best he can, but it just becomes really sad to watch. Warrior, a notoriously limited worker, obviously isn't the guy to take this one out of Sucksville, which mustn't be too far from parts unknown. After around 8 minutes, which felt like 18, Warrior retained via DQ. It's hard to even be mad at the finish, to be honest. You just end up being thankful it's all over. Number 2, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 4. The main event of WrestleMania 3 is one of the most historic in WWE history. In front of a mammoth crowd in the Pontiac Silverdome, the irresistible force of Hulk Hogan met the immovable object of Andre the Giant, with the Hulkster slamming all, what did Hogan say it was again, 900 pounds off the big man to retain the WWE title. A year later, the two faced off once more at Mania, this time in a largely rotten WWE title tournament. Andre was knackered going into the show closer the year prior, but by this point it really looked like he shouldn't have been in the ring at all. This has none of the magic of the WrestleMania 3 main event, which wasn't a technical classic by any stretch of the imagination, but has become iconic as a moment in time. Nobody remembers this sequel, which was 5 minutes of tepid non-action, capped off with a screwy double disqualification finish, a pale replication of the famous slam, and Hogan acting like he just won the friggin' title despite being eliminated from the tournament. Bad stuff all round, but it's comforting to know that Hogan probably made more money for this one pathetic match than everyone else on the card combined. Number 1, Mr. T versus Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 2. A big part of the success of the first WrestleMania was not just seeing Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper square off, but the participation of A-Team and Rocky 3-star Mr. T. Clubber Lang and Thunderlips got the better of Mr. Wonderful and Hot Rod, but Piper's rivalry with the Hollywood actor would carry on until WrestleMania 2. These two genuinely didn't like each other, and a match between them could have had tremendous heat and been a real sight to see if they employed all the smoke and mirrors and bells and whistles at their disposal. Instead, WWE decided to put them together in a worked boxing match. In a genre that notoriously has a low bar when it comes to quality, this manages to be one of the absolute worst. It was boring, it was patently fake, and it ended in a disqualification finish when Rowdy Roddy slammed him in the 4th round. I repeat, the worked boxing match ended in a disqualification. On any other day, Piper's charisma and theatrics might have carried this one, but it was not to be on this day. Unfortunately for Piper and Mr. T, this day just happened to be WrestleMania. I pity the fools. I really do.